Hi everyone, so welcome to lesson 2, the second and final video lesson of the week. As discussed yesterday, this lesson is going to be a lot more about Captain Fantastic and No Country for Old Men. I do promise this is the last kind of two sort of lessons we are doing on these films, but I'm going to talk a little bit more in detail about ideology and how these two films sort of fit together with that as the specialist area. The video will be into 3 sections. The first section will be a very brief but albeit important discussion of the exam expectations around ideology. What I'm going to do is show you some of the potential exam questions / sample assessments that you could get for this ideology question, a bit like I did in the lesson slides for spectatorship theory. Section 2 will be a key theme / ideology on No Country for Old Men, with a key sequence for, to kind of support and show you how this works. And then section 3 will be a key theme and message from Captain Fantastic, again with a key scene in HD quality from YouTube. Those two last sections, section 2 and 3, will marry up with your lesson tasks. That will really kind of bring this week's lessons to an end. Just briefly, very briefly, I'm not a YouTuber, I never will be one, but if you do have a YouTube channel, please do subscribe to this this channel, as it will only ever be used for educational resources. But given the current climate and context in which what we're going through, these videos will always be there for you for revision. This lesson will be a little bit longer, so by all means pause, engage, and just work through this video at your own pace. But it is going to be a kind of a lot more detailed analysis in relation to ideology, with Captain Fantastic and No Country for Old Men. So with that in mind, we shall start section 1 of the video, which is all about exam expectations around ideological analysis, before I drop my pen. Okay, so what is it that you're going to be expected to do in an exam that has ideology as a specialist area? If you turn your exam paper open and you have a question on ideology from one of those 4 films that we mentioned yesterday, what is an examiner looking for? Well, the first thing to consider is that we need to take it back to those 2 starter questions from yesterday's lesson. What key themes, messages and values are evident in a film? How are they then, more importantly, communicated and shown to us through film form? An examiner is basically wanting you to identify and look for key themes and ideologies. They want you to be able to demonstrate that you can watch a film, that you can analyse a scene and pick out key themes and messages through an analysis and a written response that uses film form to show this. So basically, kind of building on that and developing this sort of expectation, the examiner wants you to be able to kind of critically engage with ideology. They want to be able to kind of read your response and understand that, yeah, you can see ideology is a useful and practical way in which to engage with a film. You've mastered that concept of being able to identify different themes within a film, and you're able to write about them and show how they create meaning and relate to context. And that's really supported by the assessment objective for ideological analysis. This should be going across the top of the screen now as I talk, but really that word evaluate is key. The examiner wants you to be able to engage and show that ideology is an excellent way in which to enrich a film in terms of creating meaning, relating to context, and how it really kind of can make us understand more about the different ways in which a film is made and what it wants to tell us about key themes and messages depending on what this film is about. Okay then, so to take this practice exam question, how valuable has ideological analysis been in developing your understanding of the themes of your chosen films? The first place to start is the start of the question, how valuable? When you say those words, how valuable, what the examiner is wanting you to do is to take up a critical position. They're inviting you to either agree or disagree with the question. What we're saying in this instance is that ideological analysis as a way in which to engage with a film is very useful because it allows us to, kind of identify different themes, values and messages about, the time in which the film was made. Certainly when we looked at Pan's Labyrinth yesterday, we took on a sort of historical perspective to show that ideological analysis is useful to critique the nationalists. But really, what you need to take from this is that the ideological questions, it's all about a critical debate. It's all about showing the examiner that ideological analysis is useful, it's fruitful, and it's there to really develop our understanding of a specific film. This isn't to say that ideological analysis isn't useful, and this is something that we'll go on to cover when we're back as a class, but certainly for the moment we're agreeing with the question, how valuable has ideological analysis been? And just on that note, and some of you will remember this when we looked at auteur theory, whenever we get questions that start with how, to what extent, can it be said, do you agree? What the examiner is doing is offering you the chance to take up this critical position, to agree and to give evidence and to really develop your understanding and produce a sophisticated piece of analysis, really kind of showing that you have a solid appreciation of the specialist area ideological analysis. So to bring this section 1 to an end, 3 summative points that I want you to take down that perhaps best summarise this short little section on exam expectations and what we're looking for certainly at this early stage of engaging with ideological analysis. Number 1 is simply show the examiner ideology is useful for analysing film and enriches your understanding. Show them that you know how to engage with it as a theory and that you're comfortable at identifying key themes and messages. Point 2, look out for how far, how valuable, to what extent. The examiner in this instance is encouraging you to take up this critical debate, this critical position, again to kind of show that you have a solid grip of ideology. And finally, perhaps the most important, and something that is true with every sort of film that we look at on specification, always provide evidence to support your position. Always have elements and evidence of film form to support your ideological analysis. Please make sure you get all that down before moving on to section 2. Okay, so section 2 of this video is all about No Country for Old Men, and I'm going to discuss a key theme that kind of features throughout No Country, particularly at the start of the film, and also is embodied by Sheriff Bell, the character played by Tommy Lee Jones. Just a little bit of kind of context to recap and review the kind of historical setting of No Country. We know that it's set in the 1980s. It's a film that sort of deals with the past. It sort of considers how America has come to terms with itself. And really what we need to kind of consider is that this is a film that's very, very fearful of what is to come. Texas in particular is represented as a very backward state, not willing to change. But there's a lot of kind of fears about modernisation and sort of what is to come in the next sort of 20 and 30 years, given what's happened in the 60s, particularly with relation to the Vietnam War. This is a time now in the 80s when America's kind of coming to terms with the atrocities of the Vietnam War, and also the likes of the Watergate scandal, which was a really big political affair, and also the likes of the Manson murders. This is something that really kind of shook all of America. So really this is a period in the 80s where, it's a time for reflection. What is it that's going to change in America? And really what kind of comes through is this fear of the future. And Sheriff Bell and the opening is a really good kind of example of kind of this fear and nostalgia for the past, and this kind of like reluctance to move into the future. Okay, so how's this key theme of nostalgia and sort of a fear for the future evident within No Country? Well, first of all, this relates to your lesson task, and what I'm going to do is just talk a bit around the key scene that you're going to analyse, but it's going to focus on the opening of the film, and it's going to be just before we're introduced to Anton and he goes on this killing spree. What we get is this monologue of Sheriff Bell, who's one of the protagonists of the film, and he's really kind of talking about like a bygone era, about a time that no longer exists in relation to police work. As the monologue develops, he starts to talk about his fear and his kind of lack of understanding of new criminals, and that kind of comes to a kind of conclusion or a climax when he starts to talk about someone who's just been executed, and he kind of didn't understand the criminal's motives and was really kind of shocked by them. This monologue sort of interspersed with lots of different cut shots of Texas, looking wild, looking desolate, looking like a really kind of like backwards, almost stereotypical representation of Texas like you would see in a Western. So to kind of bring all this together, what you get in this opening sequence is a real kind of fear of the future, which is really captured by Sheriff Bell's monologue. And given that we sort of see Anton walk into the picture at this point, there's this real kind of foreshadowing that goes on. And we could even say perhaps Anton embodies this new kind of violent criminal that Sheriff Bell doesn't understand. This is really more poignant when we consider that Sheriff Bell is coming towards the end of his career as a police chief. For those of you that have seen the film, you'll know this. But this sequence at the start really does capture this kind of fear for this new America and a kind of longing to go back, particularly with reference to police work. So your first lesson task for this video is to revisit the opening sequence of No Country for Old Men. Again, I'll post a link on Google Classroom, and it's to really consider how is this theme of nostalgia and fear for the future represented using film form within this sequence. Again, this will just be bullet point notes like you've done with the Pan's Labyrinth task, but it's all about just getting to grip with that kind of like ideological study. What key themes, what messages are shown to us through film form. By all means, revisit parts of this video to help, but that is your first lesson task. So this third and final section is going to be all about Captain Fantastic and a key theme that runs throughout the film. In this instance, as the title suggests, it's going to be about how the film is critical of the contemporary American education system. It's worth noting, folks, just for a little bit of higher order thinking and context, that independent films, as discussed when we did an introduction to this, are often more socially aware and more critical. They want to kind of engage with society and be critical of what's going on, as opposed to perhaps mainstream films, which are a lot more often are there for entertainment. Captain Fantastic is a great example of a film that uses key themes, to be critical of society and to make the audience, engage and kind of question, their own beliefs and values. And in this instance, it's the way in which Ben kind of discusses with Harper's family about, the kind of flaws of the American education system and the benefits, in this instance, of homeschooling and Ben's ways of parenting. Okay, so your lesson task is going to be to analyse this scene in question, which is a really important scene called the Bill of Rights. This is a sequence which follows pretty much straight on after the dinner table sequence, when we've had the kind of really awkward argument that we should be all familiar with from previous lessons. Briefly, without me going into too much detail, because your task is going to be to really analyse the sequence and then produce a point evidence explain link paragraph. This sequence is basically the confrontation between Leslie and Ben. What's happened is she's kind of said, look, the way you're treating the kids, it's wrong. You've taken them out of society. They're just children. They need to be like ordinary, normal children. And what happens is Ben brings in his youngest daughter to kind of prove that, the way he's treating them, the way he's schooling them, that these are really kind of like, fine and, productive ways in which to raise children. It's going to be up to you to engage with the scene to kind of identify different elements of film form that show us how this is seen as critical of the American education system. In particular, look for performance, look for some binary opposites, particularly with reference to the different children from the different families. That's really important. But your task is going to be to again take notes. There'll be a handout provided, and then to pick one of the key notes that you've taken and produce a point evidence explain link paragraph as a way to kind of bring all this together as a summative task. Please approach this task as best you can. The work has been good so far, but it's important not to kind of let things slip. Okay, so yeah, very, very briefly, you all know that I like to sum up and conclude. That is it for this week's lessons. Certainly that second task on Captain Fantastic, there's quite a bit more to do. I'm expecting those paragraphs to be detailed, and I will provide a structure. Just finally, I did mention yesterday that I would put an additional slide on spectatorship theory with this lesson. those are key points that I've missed out from the videos on spectatorship theory that Christine, has kind of like identified and wants you to be aware of. She makes some really good points, so please, get them copied down, make sure we're comfortable with that. We are coming up to half term, so make sure you do get some rest, relax, chill out, but also use that time to get caught up on anything that you have missed. I do keep a track of what people are and aren't doing, so if you have missed off a few weeks' work, or if if there's a few things that you haven't done, I am aware of it. So just please make sure you do get on top of things when you can. Any questions, please just get in touch. And on that note, have a good half term, everyone.